In the history of Rome, there is a story which tells how King Tarquin desired, once upon a time, to conquer the town of Gabii. As he was unable to overcome it by fair fighting, he determined to have recourse to treachery and, in order to carry out his purpose, sent his son to the city. The son knocked at the city gate and, when from within they asked who was there, he said that he was the son of Tarquin, but that he came as a friend, not an enemy, for his father had ill-treated him shamefully, and he wished now to revenge himself by helping the Gabians to defend their city. The townsmen let him in and, after having seen him, time after time, fighting bravely in their ranks, they gave him their full confidence and finally chose him to be their general-in-chief. So far he had succeeded, but he did not know what was the next thing to be done and therefore sent a trusted slave to ask his father's advice. The king took the slave into his garden, where there was a bed of poppies in full bloom, and, walking up and down beside the bed, he struck off the heads of the tallest poppies, one by one. Then he said to the slave, "Go back and tell my son what you have seen." The slave did not know how this could be an answer to the question that had been asked, but, when he had carefully described to his master what he had seen, the son understood very well what it meant. One after another, he impeached, in turn, all the chief men of the city upon some frivolous pretext or other, and he did it so cleverly that their fellow townsmen believed them to be traitors and condemned them either to death or banishment. When the city had been deprived of all its best men, it was easy enough for him to give it up into the hands of his father. In like manner, Tissaphernes thought that, by the removal of their officers, the Hellenes would be left helpless and would no longer have the heart to fight for their lives and their freedom. But it fell out otherwise, for the officers who had been betrayed by Tissaphernes were succeeded by others still more able. Above all, Xenophon the Athenian, a man hitherto almost unnoticed in the crowd, came forward, and by his inspiring presence, his sound judgment, and his unfailing courage, gained the confidence of his comrades and brought them at last through all their difficulties to a place of safety. Xenophon was at this time in the full prime of life, being about 40 years old. He had been born and brought up at Athens, and in his youth astonished everyone by his remarkable beauty, which was of such a kind that it seemed to indicate rare qualities of heart and mind. The wise Socrates met him one day by chance and was so much attracted by his appearance that he invited him to join the company of his friends. Socrates had a great number of friends, both young and old, with whom he used every day to discuss all manner of questions, in order that he might inspire them with a love of everything that was true and noble and good. Xenophon became one of his favorite pupils, and the teaching of Socrates fell on fruitful soil. The beautiful and gifted youth grew up to be a wise and pious man. It is said that some years afterward, when Xenophon was about 30 years of age, Socrates had once the opportunity of saving him from a great danger. In a war between the Athenians and Boeotians, Xenophon was serving his country as a cavalry soldier. Socrates was on foot. The Athenians were beaten at Delium and obliged to flee. In the bustle and confusion, Xenophon fell wounded from his horse, and must either have been trodden to death by his countrymen or else killed by the enemy, had not Socrates perceived his danger and rushed to help him, carrying him in his strong arms until he was far away from the place of battle. Another of the friends of Xenophon was Proxenus the Boeotian, who was 10 years younger than himself. From a very early age, it had been the ambition of Proxenus to gain for himself a high place as leader of the people, and with this end in view he had placed himself under the instruction of the famous orator Gorgias. But his fate led him in another direction. At the time that Cyrus was preparing for his expedition against Artaxerxes, Proxenus happened to be staying at Sardis. He soon became an honored friend and guest of Cyrus and was asked by the prince to raise a company of Hellenes for his service, as had already been done by many of his countrymen. This commission he agreed to accept. For the position of general, Proxenus was in many respects well fitted, but his nature was so amiable that he lacked the power of being severe, and he was quite unable to maintain discipline amongst unruly soldiers. He considered it sufficient if the superior officer praised those who did their duty and simply withheld his praise from those who shirked it. And so it came to pass that he had more fear of being irksome to his men than they had of incurring his displeasure, and that he took more pains to avoid annoying them than they took to do their duty. The good soldiers were devoted to him, but the bad ones did not scruple to be inattentive to his orders, because they knew that he was easygoing. Proxenus was in fact the exact opposite of the stern Clearchus. Fired with affection and enthusiasm for Cyrus, Proxenus wrote to Xenophon, pressing him to come at once to Sardis and join the prince. He said that he would introduce him to Cyrus and that Xenophon would never repent of accepting the invitation, and he added that he himself loved Cyrus even more than he loved his home. Whenever Xenophon was in doubt about any decision, he was accustomed to ask the advice of Socrates and did so on this occasion. Socrates doubted whether it would be well for Xenophon to do as his friend wished, for some years before, in the time of the Peloponnesian War between the Athenians and the Spartans, Cyrus had taken the part of the Spartans against the Athenians and had helped them with large sums of money. He thought, therefore, that the Athenians might take it ill if Xenophon were to ally himself with their former enemy. It would be best, he said, to go to the oracle at Delphi and ask counsel of the god. Accordingly, Xenophon repaired to Delphi, but he had already made up his mind and worded his question thus: "To which of the gods must I pray and offer sacrifices, in order that I may prosper in the journey which I have in view and return home in safety?" The oracle named the gods. But when Xenophon returned and told what he had done, Socrates said, "That was not the right way to put the question. Since, however, you have so asked, and so been answered, depart and do the bidding of the oracle." Xenophon was well received at Sardis and accompanied Cyrus on his march. Yet, up to the day of the massacre of the Hellenes by Tissaphernes, he had taken no active part in the expedition. He served neither as general, nor as captain, nor as private soldier, but was present merely as the friend of Proxenus and Cyrus. Nevertheless, he took the deepest interest in everything that befell the army, whether for good or ill. Xenophon was deeply affected by the massacre of his countrymen, and all the more so because of his friendship for Proxenus, who was one of the 5 generals entrapped by Tissaphernes. During the night that followed that ill-fated day, he could not sleep. He had thrown himself upon the ground, overcome with grief and anxiety, but could get no rest. At last, however, he fell into a troubled slumber and dreamed that it was thundering and lightning and that his father's house was struck by the lightning and burst into flames. He started up in horror, but found that it was a dream. Then, being a pious man who believed that every event was brought about by the direct intervention of the gods, he began to consider what the dream could mean, for he doubted not that it was sent to him as a sign from Zeus, the ruler of all. But whether it betokened good or evil fortune, he could not tell. The burning of the house would seem to foretell misfortune, and yet, on the other hand, the light breaking suddenly out of darkness might be taken to signify help in the hour of need. Shaking off his despondency, he began to reason with himself. "Of what avail is it," he said, "to lie here? The night creeps on apace. Tomorrow the enemy will attack us, and there is not one of us who thinks of preparing for defense. All are lying prone, as if this were a time for inaction and giving way to despair. For what should I wait, or for whom? It is clear that I must help myself." With these words, he sprang to his feet and, calling together the captains of the company of Proxenus, he proceeded to address them, saying, "I cannot sleep, and you in like manner are unable to close your eyes thinking of the perilous situation in which we find ourselves. From the great king we can look for nothing but fury and vengeance, for we came hither to unseat him from his throne. Nevertheless, it seems to me that our condition is not such that we should give way to despair, for the gods are angry with the barbarians because they have broken the peace they swore to maintain. The gods will therefore be on our side. Moreover, we can endure frost and heat better than the weakly Persians, and are in every way, thank the gods, made of better stuff. Let us, therefore, not delay, but at once put our hands to the work. On us everything depends, for the soldiers will follow our lead. If they see us wanting in courage, they will be faint-hearted, but if we show ourselves ready for anything that may be in store for us, whether of toil or danger, and encourage a like spirit in our comrades, the soldiers will follow our example and be ashamed of their faint-heartedness." All the captains but one agreed with Xenophon, but there was one who thought otherwise, a certain Apollonides, who appeared by his speech to be a Boeotian. This man said that it was madness to dream of any other deliverance than that which they might hope to gain by throwing themselves upon the mercy of the great king, and began to reckon up all the hardships that lay before them. But Xenophon cut him short. "Thou fool," he said, Thou hast eyes and ears, but canst neither see nor hear. When the king demanded our arms and we refused to give them up and began to march away, was he not then most anxious to enter into a treaty with us? And is it not in consequence of having trusted in his promises that we have fallen into this present distress? Ye captains, this man has not the mind of a Hellene, he is a disgrace to our brave Hellas. Let us not endure him among us any longer, he is only fit to be among the camp followers and carry the baggage. In truth, said one of the captains, Apollonides is no Boeotian, nor indeed a Hellene of any sort, but a barbarian from Lydia. This you can tell by looking at his ears, which have been pierced. So indeed it proved, and Apollonides was turned away. It was now midnight, and, at the suggestion of Xenophon, the captains of the company of Proxenus went through the camp and summoned all the generals and captains of the other companies to meet together and take counsel as to what should be done. When they were assembled, to the number of about 100, Xenophon was asked to repeat in the hearing of all what he had already said to the captains of the company of Proxenus. This he did, and then went on to propose immediate action. The first thing to be done, he said, is to choose generals and captains to replace those who have been taken from us, that the army may not be left without responsible chiefs. For through order and discipline an army is strong, slackness and disorder are the harbingers of defeat. Let us first agree among ourselves who are the best men to fill the vacant places, and then call together the soldiers to confirm our decision. It will be well also to speak to them some words of encouragement, for it is not numbers that ensure victory, but confidence and courage. He who in war thinks only of saving his life is the most likely to lose it, and his death is the death of a coward. But he who, remembering that death is the common lot of all men, chooses rather to die with honor than to live in shame, is far more likely to attain old age and, while life lasts, lives nobly. The suggestion was acted upon without delay. Xenophon was chosen to take the place of his friend Proxenus, and for the 4 other missing generals successors were appointed from among the captains of their companies. In the same way, soldiers were elected to replace the dead captains and those newly promoted, so that, as far as the officers were concerned, each company was made up to its former strength. By this time it was almost daybreak, and a herald was sent around the camp to summon all the soldiers to a general meeting, the precaution being meanwhile taken of placing outposts at regular intervals outside the camp, with instructions to bring in news at once, if they should perceive any sign of the enemy's approach. When the soldiers were assembled, Xenophon appeared among them clad in his most beautiful armor, as if for a feast, with a serene countenance and eyes that glowed with hope and courage. When he was asked to speak, he addressed them in a clear, penetrating voice that all could hear. Soldiers, he said, in the terrible disaster that has befallen us, you see the result of trusting to the oaths of barbarians. From henceforth we must regard them, not as allies, but as enemies, and fight to avenge the murder of our comrades. Thus by the help of the gods may we hope to be delivered out of their hands. At this moment, it chanced that one of the soldiers sneezed loudly. Nothing could have been more fortunate, for the Hellenes believed that a sneeze was a sign sent by the gods to confirm the word that had just been spoken. Such a good omen could not fail to cheer the downcast soldiers, and Xenophon paused in his speech and proposed that all should unite in making a vow to Zeus the Savior, from whom the sign had come, that, as soon as they should again find themselves in a land of friends, they would offer thank offerings to Zeus and the other gods. The proposal was accepted with acclamation, and all prayed together and sang a hymn of praise. After this, Xenophon continued to speak. Our hope, he said, rests on a sure foundation. We have been true to the oath sworn in the name of the gods, while the barbarians have perjured themselves. The gods will not allow them to go unpunished, their anger will be turned against our enemies, and their help will be with us. They can humble the mighty and exalt the weak, and can, if they will, save us out of our distress. Let us not form too high an estimate of the Persian resources. The Mysians and the little nation of Pisidians defy the great king. In the midst of his empire they live as free men and have many large and flourishing cities. Are we at all inferior to Mysians or Pisidians? Think of our forefathers and of the world-famed victories which they won. The Persians came with a mighty army to lay Athens in the dust, but the little band of Athenians met them with undaunted courage and drove them back in disgraceful flight. After that came Xerxes with an army, countless as the sand of the sea. And what happened to him? Our forefathers overcame that army by sea and by land, and the glorious results of their victories continue to this very day. To this day our cities are free, and over us we acknowledge no other lords but only the eternal gods. You yourselves moreover have been put to the test and have not been found wanting. It is but a short time since you confronted the descendants of those same barbarians. Their number was many times greater than yours, but with the help of the gods you smote them, and they were scattered like chaff before the wind. Not one of them could look you in the face. And at that time you were fighting for Cyrus, a stranger, to set him upon the throne. With how much greater zeal will you fight now, when the battle is for your own salvation? In the last place, let each one of us take heed to do his part. Our new chiefs must be even more vigilant and cautious than those we have lost. The soldiers must be more strictly obedient than hitherto. If every man will keep his eye upon the rest and allow nothing to be done that is against the rule, then will our enemies be disappointed of their hope that in depriving us of our officers they have robbed us of all discipline. As of an heroic deed, so too of an inspiring speech it may with truth be said that it begets courage, even in a coward. The brave words of Xenophon put to flight the dark cloud of despair that had threatened to paralyze the energy of the soldiers and prepared the way for a dawning of new confidence, and a hope that in their case also the old saying might once again prove true, that fortune helps the brave. The next thing to be done was to make preparations for continuing the march. Xenophon was asked for his advice, and he answered, "Before everything else, it will be necessary to provide ourselves with food, now that we can no longer buy it in the barbarian camp, and I hear that there are villages in the neighborhood where we shall find what we want. The barbarians will pursue us like cowardly curs, who run after a man, snapping at his heels. If he turns around upon them, they immediately run away, but, as soon as he continues to go forward, they are after him again as before. I propose, therefore, that we adopt the form of a hollow square and place in the center the camp followers and baggage animals, that there may be no risk of their being cut off by the enemy. Let Chrysippus take the post of honor and lead the van, as is fitting, for he is a Spartan, and let the two eldest generals take charge of the wings, while Timasian and myself command the rear. If after a time we wish to make any alteration, it will always be easy to change. He who has something better than this to propose, let him now speak." All were silent. "Hold up hands then, those who agree to my plan," cried Xenophon. Every hand was raised, and the proposal was accordingly carried. There was another matter to which Xenophon was anxious to call the attention of his comrades. He knew how serious a disadvantage it is to an army in the field to be encumbered with a quantity of baggage, and advised that everything not absolutely needed for the march should be burned. He who would enrich himself with spoil, he said, must overcome the enemy. Only conquerors can hold their own, and take the spoil of the vanquished. Whichever of you would see again those who are most dear to him, let him remember that he must prove himself a man. This proposal was also carried by a show of hands, and the meeting being at an end, the soldiers dispersed to overlook their possessions and choose from among them such things as were indispensable. If any of them had possessions which they themselves did not need, but which others lacked, they gave them to their comrades. Then a great bonfire was lighted, and into it were cast all the rest of the things, together with the tents and the wagons. From this time forward the recognized heads of the army were Chrysippus the Spartan and Xenophon the Athenian, but more especially Xenophon. All alike were agreed in thinking that these two men were the best fitted to command, and the other generals felt that, by carrying out with alacrity whatever was proposed by them, they could most surely promote the present well-being and ultimate salvation of the brave 10,000.